So this week in the Sacred Gathering, we're going to be looking at another psalm. I guess I'm on a bit of a psalms kick going into the summer. This one is Psalm 67. And the psalm, when I first read it, was kind of like oh yeah, that's kind of nice. It's stuff that I think we know, that we have our heads around about who God is and what his relationship is. But I would think I was struck as I began studying it by the question of, well, what if we actually took this seriously? What if we actually allowed this psalm to inspire us with the way God sees the world, with the way God desires the world to be? So it's a pretty short psalm, it's a pretty simple psalm, but I just think there's a lot that can be inspiring here if we're willing to take a quick look at it. So let me start out by reading it to us. Psalm 67. May God grant us grace and bless us. May he shine his face upon us. To know on the earth your way, among all nations your rescue. Nations acclaim you, O God. All nations acclaim you. Nations rejoice in glad song, for you rule peoples rightly, and nations on earth you lead. Nations acclaim you, O God. All nations acclaim you. The earth gives its yield. May God, our God, bless us. May God bless us, and all the ends of the earth fear him. So these first couple lines are playing on a couple of important ideas. This, may God grant us grace and bless us. May he shine his face upon us. A lot of people think that the reference here is to what's called the Aaronic blessing, after Aaron, Aaron's blessing. Aaronic sounds terrible, but that is what they call it. Out of Numbers chapter 6. And this is a blessing that God directly gives the priesthood in Israel as a blessing, as a willing of goodness on people. And the Aaron's blessing from Numbers 6, starting in 22, sounds like this. The Lord spoke to Moses, tell Aaron and his sons, you will bless the Israelites as follows. Say this to them. And here's the part we hear in the psalm. The Lord bless you and protect you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his face to you and grant you peace. They will place my name on the Israelites, and I will bless them. And so I was struck this week by the fact that this is a blessing that is based on that same one done by priests, and yet in this one, there's a lot of may God bless us. There's a lot of may God bless you all. May God bless these. And so I was struck that this blessing is one that in a lot of ways is doing without a priest, or maybe expecting all of us to be priests. We are all expected to bless one another. And as we're going to see in this psalm a lot, one of the key themes here is may all be blessed. May we bless one another. May we bless all. So the other nations, the outside people groups, for them, those outside of the inner circle, even of God's family. And this psalm even extends it to the natural world as well, when it talks about the harvest and those things. So this idea of calling on God's face, God's presence to shine upon us. That phrase of may God put his face towards us, turn toward us, pay attention to us. It's an idiom that they like to use about God's attention and presence. And as I said, the word blessing keeps coming up again and again and again. The idea being that when God pays attention, when God notices our needs, he is going to bring goods, whether it's the things we need to eat. He's going to bring good things to us, whether it's just good circumstances in life. God is going to be expressing in some way, shape, or form the wholeness, the goodness, the light, the justice that is just inherent in who God is. And so say, hey, shine your face upon us. Make those things that we are all about expressed in our lives in every aspect, whether that's the physical, the circumstantial, the interior, the spiritual, all those things. God, we need blessings from you. I was struck by this idea that blessings is a good church word. We don't really use that to be blessed or have a blessing in many contexts outside of this idea of God's grace and God's presence. But I was struck by this idea of blessing has kind of an interesting parallel in what's often called gift exchange or the gift culture. Some of the reading I've been doing around this comes out of anthropology studies where people have studied cultures that instead of basing the way they relate to one another on exchange, as our culture does, right? We're used to I have money, I have cash, I pay for something, you give me something back in return. This is our expectation for work and things like that, right? I work X, Y hours, then you are supposed to pay me. There's always this idea of an exchange. There are also many cultures in the world that instead believed in gift exchange. The idea is not I trade things of equal value. I am looking to give gifts, things that cannot in fact be returned, things that cannot fall into this exchange. And so it's not just gifts like birthday presents and things like that that you could buy and give to someone with the expectation of it back. The emphasis is on things that can't really be traded in. The emphasis is on gifts that can only be given and grow in their giving. I was thinking of music as a potential one of these gifts, right? Yes, we're used to the idea of like buying concert tickets, and so we think of this as an exchange, but really. Buying tickets for a seat or a place to stand in a venue to make sure that a musician or a singer has a living is not exactly the same thing. The real gift is this performance, the things it does to us, the experience we have from this music, and that experience is something that you can get whether you're hearing a recording, whether you are paying full price for good seats, whether you're just sneaking in the back, right? The music itself is something that is given, that stirs and expresses that you can't really exchange for. Even writing a song back, even doing something, the experience of what the musician gives to us when music really moves us or stirs us is purely a gift. It is something they do, they give, and it creates something in us that's unique. And I think blessings share that feature. God expresses his goodness in blessings, and yet we can't really exchange them for anything. We can't bring them back. Kind of another similar idea from this study of gift exchange is the fact that gifts are meant to be passed on. It's not just a gift back to gift, back to gift. It's not person, again, exchanging back and forth to make things fair and even like we're used to thinking about it. One of the examples I could think of this idea of kind of passing on gifts, the fact that they are meant to kind of grow as they're given, and that's what really makes them worthwhile, comes out of this white elephant gift exchange I've been part of many years. An old mentor of mine, an old youth pastor of mine, started having this Christmas party many years ago, and in this Christmas party we always do a white elephant gift exchange, and a lot of it is fun because we're trying to outdo each other with just oddity of gifts, and some things are really good and some things are really bad. But one particular gift shows up year after year, and I think it tells us something about God's blessing as well. And what this gift is it's this stupid little electronic kind of stuffed gorilla riding on a car, and as you flick it on, it makes a super obnoxious sound. It's like and it rides and does this thing. And so it was a funny, dorky gift the first time, but someone had the bright idea of bringing it back the next year, and so we all laughed when we saw it. But then we noticed that they had added something to it, and over time, this gift has come to be much more than this silly little toy that makes a song, because it's something that we all remember. It represents this party, right? It represents our relationships. We remember 3 or 4 years ago when I got the gift, and I was going to say, what am I going to add to it? Well, I added the hat, or I added the jacket, or one year when it broke, somebody decided to fix it so it could play its dumb song again. And so this small toy has become so much more. It becomes a representation of these relationships, and the fact that we've been doing this for year after year after year, having this white elephant that we know one another, and we all get to contribute. We all get to give something there, and I think that it catches an aspect of just the idea of gift giving, and it gives something of what God's blessings are all about in that as well. God expects us not to just receive these gifts. God expects us to pass them on, to add to them, to help them represent and mean something so much bigger. So yes, we are talking about God's presence being expressed by his face turning on, that blessings are an experience of that. But the idea of this gift he gives us and blessing is something that can be so much more than just God providing, if we're really willing to dig into what blessings are and how gifts can work and how they work in many places in the world, probably including the society that this was originally written in. Kind of the last important thing I think about blessings and gifts, particularly, is the reminder that these are not earned. A gift is something that we freely give to another, not for any real reason, as I said with the music metaphor, often as something that cannot actually be repaid. It's a lot like grace in that sense, and that's an important aspect of blessings as well. These are things that cannot be bought, they are things that cannot be earned. They are expressions of God's goodness and his love, and they are expressions that we are meant to add to and let kind of snowball over time. They should get bigger and better as they are passed on from one thing to another. So that's kind of just the background of the blessings that are being talked to here. And then this last point of the fact that we are supposed to pass them on is kind of where the psalm takes it. So I'm going to actually just read the entire thing again so you can hear how the pieces fit together, and then we'll look at kind of the next little piece of it. May God grant us grace and bless us, and may he shine his face upon us. To know on the earth your way, among all nations your rescue. Nations acclaim you, O God, all peoples acclaim you. Nations rejoice in glad song, for you rule peoples rightly, and nations on earth you lead. And so we are reminded in this psalm of a really important thing that religious folks, including all of us, listen to this forget at times, and that is these blessings, these gifts that we receive from God are meant to be shared with others, especially those outside kind of the circle of God's family. And so the reminder here is to know on the entire earth God's ways, right? Among all the nations, your rescue is to be known. And know in the Bible, of course, is a very loaded word. We think of knowing things like, with our heads. I've learned that I know the knowledge, but for know in the Bible is a very relational term. It has more to do with, when someone is baffled by the way another human being acts, and someone who knows them really well is like, oh yeah, well that makes sense with who they are. Whereas those who don't know them as well don't understand the full context, who they are, what their personality is like, right? The expectation here is we are supposed to know God's ways. We understand, not with our heads, but with our hearts, relational. We get who God is and the ways he wants us to be in the world, the ways he wants us to treat the natural world and one another, and to view ourselves, right? We know kind of at the very core of our being who God is when we get this well. And again, the reminder is these blessings are an expression of that. These blessings are ultimately meant, this knowledge of God's ways, God's way of being in the world and experiencing God's love is for all peoples, is for every nation that is out there, including the ones that we might think are weird or gross or scary or dangerous, right? This psalm is reminding us this is for all people. And I think it's an important reminder, again, if we're doing this blessing idea, that God's relationship to what we call God's people, God's family, whether that's ancient Israel, whether that's the modern church, is something he's always doing for the sake of all of humanity. I was thinking it's a little bit like one of those DIY videos sometimes you see on YouTube. I remember the last time I had to replace a disposal, and I hadn't done one in a while, so I just looked up on YouTube real quick, right? Someone walking you through the process. Okay, first you unscrew this thing, then you make it this, and make sure you pull this particular nut out. It's pretty simple, but when you watch somebody, you have the ability to look at it. You can kind of learn the correct process, the correct way of being, and I think that is what God's intention is for his people. He gives special attention. He gives special blessing to those who get who he is and want to follow his ways, but the intention is that other people can look on, right? They can kind of look on how we relate to one another and look on the world like a YouTube DIY video, kind of going, okay, what's that step again? And you can rewind it 30 seconds, like, okay, how do they treat people? Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And oh, man, they don't seem to be any more spiritual than the rest of us. They sure seem to be making a lot of mistakes. Oh, but they go back and have forgiveness every now and then. They say they're sorry. That's interesting. And yet they're not afraid. How do they do that? Oh, okay. They're not afraid because they trust God does bless and God ultimately is in charge, right? The idea is God has given special attention and special documentation in the Bible and in our lives to the way he relates to people, to the fact that he loves and wants to bless and bring those things out. Why? For the sake of the entire world. And then so just the fact that the world should someday see this is such a dream that we see in this psalm. So I'm going to read it again and see where it takes us. May God grant us grace and bless us. May he shine his face upon us, to know on the earth your way, among all the nations your rescue. Nations acclaim you, O God, all peoples acclaim you. Nations rejoice in glad song, for you rule peoples rightly, and nations on earth you lead. Nations acclaim you, O God, all peoples acclaim you. The earth gives its yield. May God, our God, bless us. May God bless us, and all the ends of the earth fear him. So the dream, of course, is not just that everyone will experience God's blessing, but everyone will acknowledge, acclaim, understand the true source of blessings in life. The fact that God loves us and shows us this by bringing fullness and hope and abundance into our lives and into the world overall. Because moving on from the people of God to the nations to even the natural world is really important. The earth gives its yield, gives its abundance, gives its fullness. And you see in the Bible here a kind of a quick reminder that in the biblical worldview, we are in fact part of the world. We are not above it. And when we talk about, what it looks like to be a king in God's minds, it means taking care of and blessing and cultivating so it's better. And so we see in this psalm and other places just the desire of God that humanity will take care of and cultivate the world, and the world will provide food and take care of and cultivate humanity, which will then take care of and cultivate the earth, right? The earth is going to give its yield, not because it's inherent to what it is, not because we are such good stewards of it, but because God loves us and blesses us. He creates this meaningful relationship where we can mutually encourage and bring out the best and provide for one another. And then we, of course, get back to the very end. May God bless us. May God bless us, and all the ends of the earth fear him, know him, be in awe of him. The psalm is one that is easy to look at and say it's just idealistic. That's not realistic, especially when we watch the news, when we look at the world the way it is. There is a piece of this psalm that is a promise, recognizing that this is not going to be happening anytime soon. It's not going to be fully realized in this world, but in the new one when God fully remakes things. And yet, as always, it doesn't mean we just cross our arms and try to kill time, right? If we truly understand that the world lives and thrives by God's blessing, first we are meant to experience it, then we are meant to pass it on, this incredible gift that these blessings are of God's presence, of God's abundance, of God bringing wholeness and restoration and love, right? We are meant to pass it on. We are meant to give it to the nations and then to the entire world. It is meant to be in relationship of the pieces fitting and of wholeness that we don't get to experience right now, and seems very defiant of the world we often do look on, where people are fighting over resources, where people are trying to get what they can from one another and from the world. And so this beautiful dream of everything being whole, of everything understanding God's blessing, is one we will wait for. It's one that we know ultimately is not going to be brought about by our efforts. And yet it is one that I think if we truly understand and truly feel inspired by, we should be praying for. Say, God, come quickly. Let your kingdom come and let your will be done on this earth as it is in heaven, right? It is something that we can see and experience now. It is not just for the sweet by and by. It's something that we are asked to work towards and to live into, again, so people can see, so people can experience. It's something that I think we are called in saying blessings like this and in prayer to invite God to do in the world. God is so courteous in a lot of ways that he's not going to force himself on a world that doesn't want him. Are we inviting his wholeness and his blessing into our lives, into the lives of those around us? And then are we inviting those around us, our neighbors, our friends, our coworkers, those that we know and we care about, are we inviting them into this story, one that is full of abundance and that is enough and that is defined by blessing, not effort, not by hard work, not by fear? So I think I was surprised that this is a really beautiful psalm. May God bless us and all the ends of the earth fear him. Let's pray for it. Let's work toward it. Let's invite God, let's invite our neighbors into this beautiful psalm, this beautiful world where wholeness and abundance and blessings are our experience.